Hey, everybody, this is Perch, and thanks for joining us on Friday. I'm here with Joe Casey. Joe, how are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing great. It's we're the unfortunate ones. We don't get to go to the comic convention this weekend.
It's very sad. But I think I'll get over it.
Yeah, somehow you'll learn to love again. You'll be
That's right. That's right.
okay. Well, the usual co-host on here, Joe Corallo, of course, is at New York City Comic Con. I think he's having fun and going to the Scott-tober party that Amazon's putting out. So,
Oh wow.
would you want them to name a party after you? Does that seem weird?
No, not in a million years would I want a party named after me. That's too much pressure. I mean, it sounds like I'd have to actually be there, which is never a good thing.
Yeah, that would be a horrible problem. But no, it's it apparently they're having a good time, but I'm glad I'm here with you, and thanks for agreeing to come on today.
Sure. Glad to be here.
Yeah. Well, we've got, we've done two conversations, two interviews with you, and in both cases, people absolutely love it. And we got so much feedback. We got some questions actually for you from previous shows, but people love you. They love hearing kind of your stories of the things you did.
Well, they know me, but they don't. I mean, they love me, but they don't know me.
Okay, that's usually the case.
Which is fine. That's fine.
Yeah. Well, I
But
think
I'll answer,
we should.
I'll
have
answer whatever questions. I'll answer whatever questions you got.
Perfect. Yeah. So people in the chat, by all means, toss some questions our way, and Joe will get those answered. And just again, thanks for spending your Friday night with us. It was a long week. I don't know. But a lot of things happened this week. We launched a comic. I've interviewed Philip Kennedy Johnson went out. We talked with Sean. It's has your week been crazy? Have you got a lot of things going on?
I've got things going on, but your week was more eventful than mine. And I want to say congrats on the launch. I saw that. It looks very cool.
Thank you.
And I hope it's a big success. It sounds like you're doing things the right way. You got everything done, ready to get them out there. It should be very cool.
I'm excited to do it. I mean, the support has been great. We got it. We set a low bar for funding because we didn't need that much. And we blew through that in the hour, and I know people are signing up for it. So, I could chat a little bit more in a minute, but mostly I want to talk to you. We got some questions right out, but before we get to it, I did want to point out, so always on this day, so 30 years ago, this was the week when X-Men #1 came out. We were just talking about this before we went on the air.
Yes, I was schooling you. on history.
You were schooling me. I can't believe, because my shop had been open for, I think, 2 months or some very short amount of time before this came out. And you're absolutely right. So this title, this shipped in pieces. So tell us, you were just telling me you were upset because you wanted the gatefold cover.
I wanted the gatefold cover. I wanted just the one big piece of art, but I wanted to read the comic too. So the first issue, I mean, they broke it up into 4 or 5 weeks. I can't really remember how many there were, where they would release different covers that put together would make the gatefold. So the first cover, if I'm remembering right, if I'm seeing on the screen there, was the Storm Archangel Beast cover.
Yeah.
And I wanted to read the comic, so I bought it. And then a month later, I bought the gatefold, which I wanted as well. And to be perfectly honest, by the time I'd read it and got to the gatefold cover, I wasn't even sure I wanted the gatefold cover, but I bought it anyway.
It was, I'm trying to find, it was weird. I remember there's some strange, apparently some shops got them faster than other shops and as well. So there was a lot of confusion apparently here.
I guess. I mean, you were telling me you remember people were angry about it.
I remember somebody coming in and wanting to return a cover for another cover because they felt cheated somehow, that it wasn't a different story. I mean, I do remember there's some confusion, but this comic sold millions of copies. I think there's a lot of debate about this, but this is absolutely one of the top, probably in the top 3 comics that have been sold over the last 50 years.
And you can say this about it too. I mean, this is just my personal experience. I have not seen this. I guess I've seen it every once in a while, but not often do you see it in 50-cent boxes, dollar boxes. There's not a lot of just copies in the wild, which is amazing to me because you could find, maybe not now, but there was a good decade where you could probably find X-Force #1 in a dollar box fairly
Mhm.
easily. I know I did, but never this comic.
It's true. No, I mean, I think there's given how much it's sold, and as I recall it, I think it still stands. It set Guinness World Book of Records, I'm all tongue tied here, but Guinness records for most copies sold. And you're right, it is hard to find this book. It doesn't just hang out in boxes, and given how many of them were in the wild, and there's been different numbers out there, it's incredibly impressive that this title has held.
I have a theory about these kind of things, which is that the generation that really bought into X-Men #1 as collectors, as readers, whatever, was probably a generation past me. And the reason that you don't see these comics in mass quantities in the wild is because they're still owning their collections. They have not grown out of the hobby to a point where they've decided, I'm going to sell all my comics. Once that happens, you'll see a bunch of these out in the wild, but it clearly hasn't happened yet.
Do you think so? We're headed for a big kind of purge, a bunch of 90s stuff. This and X-Force and probably Spawn and Youngblood and a lot of those books. You're probably right. I think we're about to get a big dump of 90s kind of books out in the wild again.
Well, I came up with this theory on my, out of experience, because for a long time, we talked about this last time we spoke about my big era was like late 80s DC Comics, that sort of post-crisis relaunch of all the series and all the titles and things like that. And for a long time, like probably up until about 5 or 6 years ago, there were certain comics you would never see in dollar boxes or 50-cent boxes. One of them, which was the Mike Baron, Jackson Guy's Flash #1. You never saw it. It just, and when you rarely saw it in back issue bins, bagged and boarded with a hefty price tag on it. It was just not out there. And it was a big seller for, relatively speaking. But then about 5-6 years ago, they started showing up a lot, which made me think, I guess guys that are my age or of my generation are selling their collections. And that was a Flash #1, was something they held on to for 25 years. And as they're shedding their collections, that comic is showing up in the wild in much bigger numbers than it ever had before. So that's kind of where I came with this cockamamie theory.
No, I think you're right. I know we have a couple of retailers in the chat right now, and as more people come in, by the way, thank you again for everybody for coming by and chatting with us tonight. But I think that's a very solid theory. I'm curious if people have some comments on that, but things do go in waves like that. We probably are getting ready to hit this, and that's going to be interesting what that does to the market. But it's crazy to think of a comic selling millions of copies, and it was a big deal, of course, at the time. But I mean, we're just a very long way away from that now.
Yeah, that's another universe.
Probably not one we're getting back to anytime soon. But
no, we're in this universe real quick now.
Yeah, and we'll make the best of it with what we've got. But this was 30 years ago. It's a good way to make people feel old, I suppose. Here is very quickly. By the way, I don't want to spend a lot of time with this, but again, you mentioned at the beginning. Thank you very much for all the people who've come in, support the comic. This is an ad for that, but again, thank you. It is funded. It's available now. Come on in. If you live outside the U.S., send me a mail. Great. More steps are coming. I shouldn't have put that logo in here just yet, but yes, there's some stuff coming on the retail side that we'll have to talk about here really quickly.
Wow.
So anyway, thanks for the support there, everybody. I shouldn't have left that there. And then this is some sample. I said I'd post some preview art of some of the next books that are coming, and so we'll get this stuff out too. So those of you who are interested, we'll put up on Substack or anything else. But this is not about me tonight; it's about you. So,
well, that looks fantastic, though. I will say that that looks cool.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I'm struggling with the art in that I got a lot of pages done in a hurry, and it's been stuck at the 80 page mark. I'm trying to get to 120. I have it plotted out, and that last 40 pages is a real pain. So.
Well, I've been there. Just keep plugging away. It'll eventually you put one foot in front of the other, and you make it where you're trying to get to.
I figure if the other option, if I don't quite get it there, I'll just start doing really shitty with the art for the last 40 pages, and then he'll be fine. He'll just
Yes,
there'll
finish
be a
strong.
style
Finish
change
strong.
right in the middle. I love it. By the way, we did this bit with Sean Murphy yesterday, and I to come clean. I mean, obviously the pictures in that video were not me, but what I did was, as a kind of a joke, I just Googled, random 40-year-old men, and then just put the photos in, and that worked out great. So it's less embarrassing than actually
just confuse the shit out of everybody.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I'm just going to keep running this joke until it's thoroughly into the ground. But well, why not? That's my style.
Sure.
Well, you haven't been on a live show before, so I wanted to, as we do every time, of course, the whole purpose of the show, a deep discussion about politics, which is what this is all about. So, how do you feel about the debt limit being raised?
I feel like raising the debt ceiling is dangerous. But if it's got to be done, it's got to be done.
And do you think this signals weakness within the political party that will show an effect in 1 year?
Well, I'm in mixed emotions about this particular issue because I want to see a weak Mitch McConnell. I want to see Mitch McConnell measure up to his own chin, which is weak.
That's going to be tough. Yeah.
Yeah.
I always like the person I do that. I mean, it's a dumb bit, but we do this, and I always got to have Jeff Thorne always comes in here and immediately goes right in to the topic. Okay, let's talk about this. Filibuster rules, absolutely. And
I was kind of ready for it.
You're ready. You've seen this before. You've watched this bit in the past.
Yes, I have.
Yeah, very good. Very good. Well, hey, we've got a bunch of questions. I want to get to it. I got this email, and just kind of somebody wanted me to convey this to you. I know it's a lot of text on the screen, but basically, so this guest who's going to be at the New York City Comic Con having a good time. Huge fan of Generator Rex, as a lot of people are. Somebody trying to keep the fandom alive, writing fan fiction. I guess it's not a stupid way to do it. That's cool.
Sure.
But I love this. I was hoping you could tell Mr. Casey how much I appreciate the efforts he put into the show. It is a show that does diversity right. It doesn't pander. The characters are well developed. The storyline surprisingly deep, as well occasionally dark. I wish we would have had more time of that in the world. Anyway, do you get a lot of people come up, fans of the show? And
I do. I mean, it's one of those things where, as you probably know, something that is less popular sometimes has more diehard fans because they really have embraced it and think of it as their own. So it's kind of the double-edged sword. I mean, you want something to work on a level that so it keeps going and it's considered a success. At the same time, it's those cult pop cultural phenomenon that breed the most passionate fans. So it's kind of it's the yin and yang of the whole thing. Because if there's one thing I can appreciate, it's a passionate fan. And I feel bad for anyone who loves something that's not around anymore. But I'm definitely convinced that part of the reason that you love something so much is because it's not around anymore.
Yeah, for sure.
So I would tell anyone who's a fan of something like Generator Rex that I appreciate it and I feel the same way. But part of why I feel that is because it is what it is. It's a finite thing. It's not tainted by any bad experiences, that certainly none that I dwell on. So, what else can you say about it, really? I mean, love what you love and don't sweat it if it's a fleeting shooting star in the sky of pop culture.
It's good. I mean, it's better to go out on top, wouldn't you say? That I mean, even it's always you go out with people wanting more rather than have it go 10 more years and drive it completely into the ground.
Well, I wouldn't say Generator X went out on top, but it went out with ratings that were wanting, to say the least. However, it did stay true to itself. It maintained whatever integrity it had from the beginning. I think it maintained until the end. And if something is a lost cause in terms of its success or, the metrics of success, then if it still has some integrity, you could at least hold on to that.
Yeah. How do you feel about fan fiction in that? I mean, obviously, I think as somebody who's kind of in the business and everything else, that I know that's something you can't necessarily engage in, but I've seen some creators say they love it. They like the engagement from the fans. Others say they hate it, that it's they wish it wouldn't happen. What's your take on all that?
Well, I can't read it really.
Right.
It's not, especially things that are ongoing concerns. From a legal standpoint, I can't read it. I appreciate it happening, and I guess if I was a young fan of something, I'm sure I did the same types of things when I was younger, certainly. So it's not like I would discourage anybody, because anything that stirs somebody's creativity is ultimately a good thing as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
But and I sort of there's part of me that wishes I could take a look at some of this stuff, but I really can't. And the things that I have seen have veered more on the, let's just say, the pornographic side. So
what?
Because there's some of that stuff out there too,
Yeah, I'm for sure. I apologize. I'm in a different location here right now, so I apologize with my mic. Can you hear me okay, by the way, Joe?
Sure.
Okay. I let me know in the chat. I'm seeing a couple of comments, but sorry about that. If the microphone isn't good, I'll see what I can do kind of on the fly here. But there's been a couple questions for you, and we could do this kind of throughout the whole kind of video. So if people have questions. So overly nerdy question. What do you say? Is Apocalypse more powerful than your Harbinger from your cable run?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Apocalypse more powerful. Settled.
What more can be said? I mean, it's right there in the name.
Yeah, I'm with you. Yes. How about Yul, who is a retailer? Are we ever getting those Godland blacklight posters? Is that something that's coming?
I hate to disappoint Yule, but probably not anytime soon.
Okay. Well, that's too bad. That would be if there was a comic that needed a blacklight poster, I think Godland would be one of those.
Well, it would make more sense to actually have put it out while the series was up and running. But now that it's been, almost a decade of it gone, I don't know if the demand, aside from Yule, is there.
I'm comics, right? They do struggle a little bit with they get more popular after they're done, and then the opportunity to do some of this merchandising and some of this attached stuff gets trickier, right?
Yes, for sure.
How about this is a more tough question. What was the hardest corner you wrote yourself into, and how'd you get out of it?
Well, that's a good question. I really I can't think of a time. Well, I can't think of a time where that's happened, because when I'm in some sort of narrative corner, for me, that's kind of where things get exciting and interesting, because at least in that moment, for the most part, that you're not trapped in any cliches. You're not the obvious answer is not right there, which would probably be a cliche. So if I'm in some sort of corner, it's not difficult. It's an opportunity. And I've always tried to look at it in that way. So I hope I'm not dodging the question, but it's just never happened to me. I've never really had writer's block. I've had times where I've let something sit to see if my mind can work out a solution that excites me. But that's different than being in a corner, I guess you could say. I mean, I've never been, feeling like, oh no, where do I go from here? That's the great times as a writer. Like, where can I go from here? It could go anywhere. So let's just pick the weirdest way and go for it.
Yeah. No, I mean, does it? I would imagine it also helps. I mean, many of your series, you've certainly done some ongoing series, but you also do a decent number of finite series, and it's got to be easier with those to have a general plan of where you're going. And so it's it's less likely you're going to write yourself into that corner because you have a beginning, middle, and end at least somewhat in mind, right?
Well, to a degree, yes. I mean, if it's a really tightly structured plot, then yeah, I know where I'm going. I still like to leave myself room to improvise and go on different tangents, because I don't want to have written the thing before I've written it, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
to be honest, something like Godland, we didn't have an ending per se. I had a notion of how I wanted to end it from ambition point of view, I guess you could say. I had a notion of like what I wanted the ending to feel like, but how we were going to get there and what that ending would be, I had no clue, because I was having so much fun just being in the thing that Tom and I realized, okay, let's kind of start to steer towards the ending. That's when I started to get the night sweats and thought, okay, well, this it's such a buildup, and we've really, it's been a high bar so far. How can we end on the highest note possible? Luckily, that's when we let ourselves off the monthly schedule, to say the least, and let the ending sort of, we let it come on it of its own volition. And when it did, it worked out. I'm pretty proud how that series wrapped up. So it was the right move to make, to let it percolate to the point where we thought, okay, this is going to be satisfying. This works on the levels we wanted to work on. Yeah, that's kind of how that one went. But yeah, the tightly plotted stuff, I pretty much know the endings going in.
Very nice. That book, Godland, seems to be growing in popular. I mean, I hear more about it today than, well, maybe that's not completely true, but it seems to be dipping back up in popularity, where I hear more about it lately than I did a couple of years ago. Is that kind of something you've experienced with books before, where you put it out, it certainly got a lot of attention at the time, but then over years down the road, it starts to get a second life, if you will?
I think people who are into comics in general tend to revisit certain eras. For whatever reason. Maybe it's one book that kind of leads them back, and then they see other things that were coming out at that time. I would assume that Godland was sort of really a going concern about 10 or 12 years ago, which is about right for people to kind of look back and say, well, what was going on in 2008 or 2009, 2010, and what did I miss when I was buying comics back then? And Godland, it had its fans, but it was, I would say, to be generous, it was a mid-tier kind of title in terms of sales and awareness. So I think there are people that are sort of rediscovering it. And, Tom Sholey's still out there doing good work. So I think when people investigate his career, when he puts out something like the Jack Kirby book or the Fantastic Four book, they go back and see what else he's done, and eventually they stumble onto it. So I think people find it in that way as well.
Oh, that makes sense. How about and we'll move on here. We'll pepper you with a few more questions and then go with some other stuff. But of all the various team books you've written, and you basically have worked for all the major companies, certainly, and been on the top books. Were any characters ever required by editorial to be included, and you had just no interest in that character?
Not that I can recall. I think every team book I've done, I was able to pretty much dictate the lineup. The only one where there were characters that you could consider off limits to me was when I was doing the X-Men, because Grant was there first, and he picked out his characters that he wanted to use. So I certainly, except for Wolverine, which had to be in every book, I knew that he had Cyclops, he had Jean Grey, he had Professor X. Even I kind of stayed away from Professor X as well. Right. Beast and Emma Frost and those characters. So, but aside from the ones that were taken, I had free reign to just pick my roster, which I don't know if that happens anymore. I have no idea. But yeah. So to answer the question, no editor has ever said make sure you put this character on this team or whatever. I was working on Wildcats or the Last Defender
That
series
sounds
I
lucky.
did. Well, Perch, they knew who they were dealing with. I wasn't going to take any shit from anybody. You know what I'm saying?
I love that. Very good. So there's no, like, nobody came to you and be like, you're going to have to put Maggot in this book and have him be a main character.
No, not at all.
How about your work on Cable with Ladrone? How'd you two get together? Because that was a pretty magical pairing on that particular title on Cable. How did that come together?
Well, he was on the book for a few months preceding me. He was working with James Robinson, and I remember being over at James's house when he lived in Burbank, and him showing me the pencils, and I was just blown away. I just thought, who is this guy? I mean, this was 1997, and so it was still the quote unquote image style of art was still kind of the big thing. So this guy drawing like a cross between Kirby and Mobius was completely unique and completely singular. And I just thought, wow, this guy's amazing. And then to get to work with him, I just was so lucky. And I feel like there's a lot of lucky moments in my career. That's the first one. Aside from getting the gig in the first place, thanks to James, the fact that I was working with Ladrone it put my writing in a certain context that it would not have had if I was working with some image style clone that was just kind of knocking around in comics before they went on to an animation career, which a lot of those guys did. But the fact that I was working with Ladrone really, I feel like in hindsight, but I knew it at the time, totally set me apart and actually put me in the space that I wanted to be in as a writer, which was that I'm in it for the art of comics. I'm in it for the medium. It's not a stepping stone. I want to make good comics. And here was this singular talent, this genius level talent, that I was lucky enough to get paired with. And of course we got on like a house on fire. So it wasn't like, I mean, that was a good 2 years that we worked together. We became, great friends and still are to this day. So yeah, it was a fantastic, I mean, yes, there was editorial nonsense we had to deal with, but in terms of creatively, we really bonded, and I wouldn't trade that experience for anything.
That's awesome. I mean, both of you liked, there's some comments in the chat about this, but you liked making comics. So
yes.
That was a huge, that it shone through a lot of the work.
It's one thing when you get a gig and you think, I'm going to just write this comic and get the check. But it's another thing when it's two creators, a writer and an artist, who really are going for it. And they're thinking, we're going to kick some ass on this thing and show people what we can do. We got something to prove. Ladrone had only broken into Marvel about a year before me, so he was still new, and we just wanted to go balls to the wall, as hard as we could go.
It's that's one of the best parts of that era, that title. And again, it's kind of like Godland, some of these other things. It's something people remember. You have a lot of books where years later people really remember that. It tends to resonate with people much, much further down the road than a lot of titles. And again, some great stuff here. I'm curious to get your take on a few other things, but again, thank you everybody in the chat who's come tonight. Stefan, good to see you. I still need to reach out to you and schedule an interview, but we definitely will get some we don't have any bad Batman. Well, you might have a bad Batman book pitch in you, Joe. Do you have some terrible Batman idea up your sleeve?
Well, sure, but mine actually got printed. I did a book probably around 2002 called Batman Tenses, which was a 2-issue prestige format thing. It was, and it was my first time to write Batman, and I said to myself, I'm going to write a Batman story that just has Batman in it. Has none of the other Batman. I didn't have Commissioner Gordon, didn't have Robin, none of the Rogues Gallery. It was kind of a year one type of story. There was no real Bat Cave. There was no real Bat gadgets. There was no, I just stripped away everything that surrounds Batman and thought, I'm going to write 120, 130, 140 pages of that Batman. And it didn't go over that well. In my recollection, it didn't exactly make much of an impact. So my bad Batman pitch got written. I mean, I got paid for it, so I guess there's that. But
can't be that terrible. We got paid for it.
Yeah.
How about one last? So I don't know if you've been following all this other debate, but what's your take on Arby's? Is Arby's good food, bad food? What's your take?
Let's just say, if you don't have something nice to say about something, don't say anything. That's my take on it.
Okay, I think he's answered that question. There you go. I've gone through this with other people. I'm curious. You've been in the industry for a long time. You've worked for all these different companies, lots of other things. In October, the month of October, we're getting just under 500 comics. I keep reading all these articles, and I see people talking about how DC is slashing comics. This line got repeated yesterday on another site saying, well, DC's cut 25% of their line, but that doesn't reflect any reality we're seeing in actually the numbers that are being shipped. DC actually leads October with almost 75 books alone. They're the largest publisher in October. Does this surprise you that there's this many books? Yeah, we keep seeing this on news sites. I've seen it off the comic sites. I've seen it off Comics Beat. People keep bringing this stuff out. What? There's no that doesn't connect to any math anywhere.
No, they're doubling down on their output. It looks like to me.
I mean, 74 books. How do you? I mean, doesn't this seem surprising? I mean, how are they beating Marvel like this?
I mean, I'm scratching my head, Perch. I have no clue how they're doing this. They're so understaffed, and yet they're just cranking out material. Certainly somebody in that company is almost thrilled about the paper shortage and all that stuff that's going on, because they're like, okay, finally we can put the brakes on a little bit. Jesus Christ.
Yeah, no kidding. On the retailer side, I look at something like this and this is a nightmare for me. And I have to imagine comic creators being able to kind of stand out. I mean, obviously, we want all the books out you can, and people should tell all the stories they can, but this is a crazily unsustainable number.
Well, I mean, it would take a certain type of fan to just be able to keep track of everything from DC alone. Yeah. That's the part that vexes me, is that how can you get excited about any one thing when there's just this deluge of stuff?
It's a world where October has 4 weeks of basically comic shipments, and you're talking about nearly 20 books from DC alone a week. And, nobody's going to, I mean, how in the world do you even come close to managing that? I have no idea, but not to stare at a graph all night. But I mean, this is just next week. So next week alone, it's 128 comics. 11 of the DC books are Batman alone. There's 22 DC books coming out next week. 50% of them are Batman titles. 30 number one comics. Only 8 comics out of this entire 128 are actually past 25. And again, this is an old person comic collector kind of mentality. Nobody's caring about long running numbers anymore. But I don't. What do you? Have we moved past a place where we care about numbering at all? Does that even matter anymore?
Well, clearly we have, except for the number one. That still means something to people, clearly, and
that's true.
I just, I'm looking at these numbers and I'm just I don't know what to say, to be honest. I mean, I buy 3 DC books right now, so I'm okay.
Yeah.
But for a DC, I don't know what they call a Marvel zombie version of a DC reader, but that's a lot of money to be spending.
Yeah. No,
It's
it
just, I mean,
absolutely
crazy.
is. You're well over $100 a week.
Yeah, I mean, Jesus Christ.
It's I'm hoping one of these shows will get somebody like a Tom Brevoort or at that level. And I want to just, and not to shame anybody, but just like, please explain to me the business logic here. Cause none of us are getting it at the moment.
Well, I mean, they're landing to some degree. I mean, I think anybody who would be privy to the numbers, the financials of these things, I'm sure has a
Mhm.
justification that fits a narrative that allows them to keep their job.
Right. Right. I mean, it's penciling out net profitable in the end. It just feels insane.
It feels like one of those things where you look at it and you think, okay, where's this leading to? Is this leading to a boom or a bust? Because it doesn't feel like it is going to just hold at these numbers, at this kind of output. It's going to go one way or the other. I have no idea which way it's going to go, but
Mhm.
I mean, I guess we'll all find out for good or for bad,
It's it's a crazy amount, and we can go through this quicker because I'm trying to balance it now by showing some covers, showing some text. I realize that's incredibly tiny, but just a lot of different pieces out. You mentioned, somebody asked in the chat, you're collecting 3 DC books. Do you mind telling which books are the ones that you're grabbing right now?
I am buying Superman and the Authority because it's Grant.
Okay.
I'm buying Batman 89 and Superman 78.
Okay, there you go. Those. How are you liking the Batman Superman kind of carrying on from the movies? How are those titles landing with you?
I'm on for the ride. The jury's still out, but I'm in it for the full 6 of each one. I almost wish that they would not cap it at 6 because I feel like, from what I've seen so far, I've seen the first 2 issues of both series. I feel like if they were allowed to run, they both find a rhythm that could be really satisfying. At capping them at 6, they're gonna have that kind of rhythm. And
Right.
as an old schooler kind of reader, I know the rhythms of a 6-issue story, and
Yeah.
for me, it's kind of over before it's over. I mean, you see where things are going before they get there. If you know the rhythms of, for instance, if something is comes out as a 4-issue miniseries, unless it's just wildly experimental, I kind of know the shape of that kind of story. And the same with the 6-issue series, the same with the 12-issue series. It's
True.
only
Yeah.
an open-ended series that can veer off into weird directions and you maybe don't know where it's going. Now that might not be the most commercial route, but for me as a reader, it's more exciting.
I agree. I think that it's when you see it capped at 6 issues, it's hard to believe you're going to get this big expansive world. You're getting a kind of finite story. It's I mean, you kind of can, as a reader, you get a sense of where it's going in the first issue toward the end. So I just it feels like there's a problem there. Or not a problem. I mean, just it takes some of the energy of that book away.
Well, if you've read a million comics or heard a million stories or seen a million movies that all, for the most part, adhere to, the often cited 3-act structure, then you tend to know these dramatic movements as they're happening, sometimes before they're happening. And depending on the skill of the writer or the storyteller, sometimes you can telegraph these things to a distracting degree. And that's when that's when I get bummed out, when I get there before the story's taken me there, and not that these comics are doing that, but I'm just commenting on the fact that being 6 issues, and in Grant's case, the Superman Authority is only 4 issues, and 3 of those are out already. And I feel like by the end of issue 4, he's just getting warmed up, you know. And then it's
hard. Yeah, for him, I mean, he's a big, expansive storyteller, and he spent so much time in these first couple issues. I mean, I'm reading that as well, and there's a lot of setup in those early issues to the point where it's like there's not enough time to pay this off.
Well, Grant's proven as well that imagine if there was only 4 issues of Animal Man, to have that series cut off right before the Coyote Gospel, you know?
Yeah. No, you would have gotten to none of the payoff, really.
Yeah. Totally.
Yeah. I don't quite understand the thinking here. The other publisher though that's really expanded, certainly in this year in 2021, is Image, to where they are frequently neck and neck with Marvel, with DC in terms of putting out books. That's another one where it feels like they've I don't want to say lost the plot a little bit, but they've got so many different genres and some really good books. But it's really hard to kind of market or understand what is out there for you to get. It's it really relies on the creator kind of doing all the legwork themselves, and that has mixed results.
I don't know if right now I don't feel like it's all the legwork. I mean, they're selling books, they're selling comics to a greater
they absolutely are.
Number than I expected. Some of these things come out, and I saw some story today on the news site that shall not be named that said some comic was going to sell almost 100,000. I'd never heard of it before.
Yeah. That's true. That's fair. I mean, it's not like Image is doing nothing, for sure. Yeah.
But there's a lot of product there too. I've kind of been sitting it out at Image. The last things I put out was last year, and it won't be the next thing that comes out for me from Image will probably be either next year or the year after. Because I just had a sense of like maybe it was going to be some kind of fallow period, but I was completely and totally wrong about that. They're doing just fine.
Yeah, no, it's been an interesting year. I think next year feels like the trouble year, but who knows? Anyway, we're all trying to predict kind of what's going to happen. Again, thank you everybody in the chat. Stefan's there, Chuck Gibson, another person I'd love to have interviewed, a wonderful artist there. But a lot of good stuff. Dynamite. You came for the Dynamite. So Nick, I know Nick was here in the chat a little bit. Hopefully he's having a great New York City Comic Con. I know you ran into Joe, but we got some Dynamite covers. What do you think here, Joe?
Well, I know Nick Barucci. I've worked at Dynamite, and these are all very, very attractive covers.
There you go. It's funny how this bit was really born from people who would repeatedly tell me that in the U.S. nobody will put girls on covers anymore, and every week Diamond proves them wrong.
I'm hoping that Red Sonja logo is a homage to the old Incredible Hulk logo from the early 70s, but I may be projecting there.
I love the angle of it. These covers, and especially this week's, the very attractive art aside, there's some real energy to these books. I love the color and the composition you've got going on here. This is a really good week for you, Nick.
Well done.
How does it work when you at the Comic-Con? I don't know. Nick's in the chat. Maybe you can respond to us. But is it awkward if Dynamite's got posters and material up? All the other publishers are trying to be a little bit more conservative, kind of different audience. And Nick, you've got. Does anybody ever come up to you and get pissy about it, or you'll have to tell us in the chat. We absolutely should do this.
Dynamite has a booth at New York City Comic Con. I hope they're selling our Captain Victory book that we did for them, because that thing's amazing.
Absolutely, but these covers are great. That logo, I agree that it stands out incredibly well. But Nick, we got to talk to you here soon for sure. We have fans who outnumber the awkward. Excellent. Glad to hear it. And Stefan, you're doing a dynamite cover. Okay. Well, anyway, some things out of Marvel here. Certainly, they're continuing with Spider-Man. Spider-Man's going weekly. You've written certainly for Marvel. Do you think that? How does that kind of impact a? Nick's not at New York. Never mind. How does a weekly book impact a writer? Have you ever had to do that? A book that shipped more frequently. Has that ever been something you've had to deal with?
No, the closest I came was when I was on the Superman books, and there were times where they were fairly tightly plotted from book to book. So it felt like you were on kind of a weekly. It wasn't a weekly schedule, but it felt like a weekly narrative. But other than that, that's too frequent for me.
I think it feels like it's going to burn out the readers really quickly. I mean, you gotta. I guess Spider-Man. In fairness, there's been multiple copies of that book, and you had Spectacular and Web and all the rest, but it really does feel like you rapidly burn out your group. But I mean, DC's publishing 50% of their titles are Batman this week, so what do I know anyway?
Well, the only thing about weekly comics that is, a downer, ultimately, if you're a certain kind of comic book fan, again, you know that a weekly comic is probably not going to have certainly not the same art team from issue to issue, but often not even the same writer. So if you're into creative teams and the runs they can have, the consistent creative runs they can have, you're not getting that.
Yeah.
So you're kind of going in with one strike against you, but probably enough people don't care about that certainly they're doing it. So I guess it's not that important. I'm just old fashioned, I guess.
I there's a value to spacing it out, but at any rate, anyway, a lot of good people in the chat, a lot of good people seeing us. Always happy with that. And that's what we have next week. I'm curious, manga. Are you reading any manga? Is that part of what you go in for?
It's been a while. I got to be honest. It's been quite a while. And only because what I chalk it up to is that it's no one in my house reads it. And so if I don't have, younger people kind of pointing me in a direction, then I'm, with material like this, I just don't seek it out on my own,
Right. It could be hard to get into. I think there's the one kind of interesting thing. We've seen some of the mass market stuff. I think My Hero Academia, Demon Slayer, One Piece, that stuff's crossed over. But there's so much content there. And I know for a fact that Viz is working pretty hard, and a couple others people are working really hard to try and figure out ways to make it more accessible, to kind of get people over that hurdle. What seems to happen is once people start, it locks them in for years. And that's... I'm curious if they can kind of crack that nut where they can get people to kind of absorb, because there's so many different genres of content out there that's getting reprinted over here.
Well, that's the thing. I'm so bad with time now that it just feels like it was just yesterday that I was reading Slam Dunk, and that was probably 20 years ago.
Nice. How about the the other odd part of it this year? I don't know if I'll phrase this question up right, but I'm gonna describe this really poorly, but we'll give it a shot anyway. It feels like some of the manga license stuff they've done. Deadpool meets MHA. You've got this Marvel characters meets Pets, and there seems to be a deeper desire to kind of take these brands and play with them in a way that isn't happening here in the U.S. nearly as much. And I'm curious, like, is that? Do you think there's anything unusual about that? That the content actually had to go overseas, had to go to a completely different publisher in order to get more experimental and potentially reach more audiences? I find that odd. But what do you think?
I think that looking at this Marvel Meow thing, which looks fantastic, but I think when it comes to like brand that you might not take those same chances in America. It's like, remember back in the day, not to date myself, but you'd hear about big movie stars going to Japan to do like coffee commercials and things like that. Things that in the days before the internet would never get seen in the US. So it had no impact
Yep.
on their brand or their image or whatever. And I think there's some of that maybe going on with with a North American brand, or like Spider-Man. It's like, well, let's try this out in a different market, and if it works, we'll bring it back here. If it doesn't, who's going to know? But of course, everybody knows. But maybe that's part of what's going on with something like Marvel Meow.
Well, it's odd to see. I mean, DC obviously has the webtoon deal that they've announced, and the Batman Family Adventures, whatever it is actually doing extremely well for the platform. It seems to be reaching kids, but the surprising part of all that is, or I don't know if it's surprising or not, but DC has struggled to kind of reach that market for a while with very mixed success. And so ultimately what seems to be cracking it is them having to go and work with a Korean digital provider to take their characters and then bring them back in a format that's actually going to hit the market. I just find that fascinating that it had to go completely in that direction or actually tackle these things.
That is interesting. I mean, I assume that once you try to different ways to imitate something, that try to feign authenticity, cultural authenticity, at some point you just go right to the source to some degree and say, look, here's the IP, do what you do, and let's see if we can have make some magic here.
Yeah, it's amazing to see it work. All right, so we didn't talk about this when we interviewed you, but we got all the way to it. So can you give? So I don't know if people remember this book or know about it, but can you give us the background on this title that you did with Nick Dragotta?
Well, actually the artist ended up doing was Dustin DeGuin, my Wildcats 3.0.
Oh, that's right. It wasn't. Yes, of course.
Co-created. I had a story to tell. I guess you could say I had a version of that of the character that I felt was worth exploring to some degree. And the funny thing was, we announced it twice. Once as you can see, in 2017, which prompted Marvel to, as far as I'm concerned, rush out a book of their own. And then we re-announced it for last year, 2020, to which Marvel then seemed to rush another miniseries of their character into production. So it was odd that happened. Timing is everything, I guess. But the one shot that came out, the issue that came out last year, turned out really well, actually. And Dustin and I had a great time on it. He did a phenomenal job on the art. And apparently, I just found this out recently, got nominated for a Ringo Award for Best Single Issue.
Oh, nice.
So that was a pleasant surprise. So, I'm happy with how it turned out. And it did reflect my vision of that character, I guess you could say. I want to tread lightly here or tread carefully here, but I'm quite happy with the material that we put out. The issue that we put out has turned out really well.
And it's one of those books that it's nice that you're able to kind of fulfill some stories and maybe, whenever you do work for the big two, we did talk about this last time. At the end of the day, it isn't your character. And, you try and do the best you can by them, but ultimately you have to let them go and they go in different directions. So it is nice you're able to kind of pick up some threads. And I would imagine that happens a lot for writers where they have a vision of where they want to go. They don't get to tell the complete story, but with any luck, they can go ahead and get it told somewhere else. So that's pretty cool.
Well, the Marvel character had changed so much and gone away from my original idea that I just wanted a proof of concept sort of opportunity. And so, I'm in a position where I can do that. So I did it. And that's really the long and the short of it. Is
That's awesome.
and nobody stopped me from doing it. To be perfectly honest, I never heard a peep from anybody about it, so I did it.
I love it. I'm glad you did. And then these shows, and this fits some questions. So again, another huge fan of Generator Rex. Was a fourth season ever planned?
Well, it wasn't planned because we knew the show was not going to come back. I mean, it could have gone on, many seasons. And it was built to last, but the ratings weren't there. And back then, whenever this happened, 10 years ago, there was still a decent toy market out there. And unlike Ben 10, the Generator X toys just didn't catch on. And that was a big factor. That was a big deal. When there's no CP component that's really booming, the motivation to keep the series going is less and less.
Yeah. How about speaking of a series? Well, not really keeping a series going. Is Sex coming back again in trade paperback at Image?
Yes, that is the plan.
Excellent.
The pandemic kind of derailed a little bit of how it should have gone. I mean, the 7th volume should have been out by now, but that's down to me. I have to write the goddamn thing, and Kowalski is he hounds me every so often about when are we going to do this? Let's get back on the horse, and I'm right there with him, except I have to write the thing, and it's not a difficult book to write, but I wouldn't even say it's complex, but it's very novelistic. There's a lot of different characters. It's a wide cast, and there are threads that have been set up that I want to pay off in the right way, and so it's more of a jigsaw puzzle than most of the things that I work on. So that's also contributed to its delay, but it's all on me. I'll take the rap for that. I mean, I didn't solicit anything and put it out, but the thing about going straight to trade is that you have to bank a lot more material before you can solicit, before I feel comfortable soliciting. So there's a lot of work that has to be done. Kowalski's actually very fast as an artist. So once it's written, it's just a matter of, however many chapters it is. I think the next volume is going to be 5 chapters, so it'll come out sooner. Once it's written, Kowalski can draw that in about 5 months, and then it'll be out.
Nice.
So hopefully, if I can get off my ass and write it, we'll get that 7th volume out.
I know people are looking forward to that. How about is there a title? We've asked you kind of these questions before, and I'm sure it's one you get a lot, but is there a title you would want to write the most? Is there some book out there that's kind of on your list of just something you'd really like to take a crack at?
Well, not necessarily like jumping onto a monthly title that already exists. There are things I want to write, but we talked about this last time. I'm going to try to actually write them, so I don't exactly want to say here and now, because
that is fair. Yes,
they might happen. You never know.
Yeah, we'll have to leave that one for a bit later. Curious about this. Maybe so. Working at Marvel, I don't know if you did this. Actually, this question would fit kind of the conversations that you have. But do they talk about the older artists much? Do they talk about the past? When you're working at Marvel, you're working with editorial, and I suspect the mileage is going to wildly vary. I mean, just from the conversations I've had with different editors that I know, some talk a lot about the past. Some I'm sure have never read, back more than 5 years. What was your experience? Was there kind of a lot of talk about the past and older artists and creators?
Well, when I was really working there a lot, it would depend on the editor.
Yeah.
I mean, I know for whatever reason, Tom Brevoort gets a lot of stick in certain corners of fandom. I've found Tom to be a pretty good editor, a great editor, actually, especially if you compare him to other people who are banging around and have been banging around. and he knows.
I like the way you phrase that.
Well, and Tom knows his comic book history, and he knows he's got pretty good taste as a reader, as a fan. But I say that because he and I share a lot of taste, so of course I would say that. But yeah, I mean, you know which editors you can talk to about that stuff and which ones you can't. And
right.
you tend to know that going in from the type of material they edit. I don't really, I mean, there's no one I can say off the top of my head. I mean, if I could throw somebody under the bus, I probably would, but there's no one that comes to mind that I could really tag on, because the editors that maybe don't have a sense of history, I know how to deal with those guys. You know, I mean, it's just,
right.
it's personality management, really. And I would say that, well, I mean,
I'm curious to get your
direct to the question. Some editors probably have a hard time referencing the past because they don't want to look like some old head, you know.
right.
They're
That's
still
true.
in that phase of their career where they want to seem like, oh, I'm on the cutting edge, or I'm always looking forward, or whatever. And that's fair. I mean, if you're just trying to have job security, you do what you got to do.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Yeah.
So that happens sometimes, I think.
This may be, and you don't have to comment on this if you don't want to. I don't know if it's a hot take or not, but I agree with what you said about Tom Brevoort. He does, one of the places I think he gets not the recognition he deserves is he does have a mind for the history. He does carry that with him, and this is not suggesting a demotion or anything, but I wish they were utilizing him more actually as an editor rather than an editor in chief, because I do think there's some skills that he has that maybe hasn't carried over as much as it should have. And I think that kind of strength with that part of his job actually is one of those things that goes unfulfilled. But anyway, I don't know if that's a controversial take at this point or not.
I mean, I think that Tom has been around long enough. He's proven his bona fides. He has nothing to prove to anybody. People who want to, give him hell for the certain decisions he's made. To be honest, I mean, certain things that he'll own up to, for good or for bad, and there are certain things that you can never know the behind the scenes machinations that he had to either live with or contributed to or argued against and lost. You don't know. I know some of these things because he's told me about them, but most fans just don't know that kind of those inner workings, and nor should they. But I think if you're gonna, especially an editor, I mean, here I am defending editors. What am I, crazy? But when it comes to editors, if you don't know the whole story, it may be in bad form to lash out at them. I mean, look, you're entitled. People are entitled to bitch and moan about whatever they want to, but I would never. It just doesn't. Don't get personal when it comes to editors, because they're working for peanuts generally, and they're doing the best they can. And they lose battles just as much as creators do. They fight for things and lose. So it's, there's misery all over, Perch. That's what I'm trying to say.
Misery everywhere. I still believe it, and we can move on, but I definitely think, at least from the people I've interacted with, and somebody asked in the chat, do you see a decline in competence? I don't know if that's the way I would phrase it, because you also have, you referenced it, you have a extremely short-staffed group, increasingly shorter and shorter staffed group. And the training and the mentorship just doesn't seem there anymore, or at least not as much as it used to. And it just feels like people are getting thrown into the deep end, and then it's like, well, some will float and some won't. And I don't know if that's the best way to go about it. I don't think that's a knock on the editors. I think it's this system is not working as well as it should.
And by the way, if you're an editor at a big publisher, depending on what you want to get out of that job scenario, you're going to be a different type of editor. If you want to be editor-in-chief in
True.
a Marvel Comics, you're going to be a different kind of editor than you would if you just wanted to make good comics. And that's a fact.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's politics for you.
Exactly.
You've seen, so you've watched these streams. You've seen this bit before, right?
Yes.
Was this intentional or not? Okay. So as a writer, you have a unique perspective on this as well. Sometimes I think the artists go into business for themselves. They draw things maybe in a different way. Sometimes the writer's trying to slip in a little joke. Curious to get your take on these. Chat's got some. This, I think, is just awkward wording, but.
Yeah. I think this was unintentional.
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, in the context of what's going on, I would agree. I think this is Spider-Man, Superman meeting Spider-Man, I believe, for one of the first times. And I think this is just, I don't think this has any kind of deeper connotation. But what about this? And this was a common bit where, the name Dick was certainly more popular, I think, once in years past. But you got panels like this. The writer has to be, somebody's chuckling inside somewhere, right?
Well, it depends on when this was published. I'm saying this is unintentional as well.
Okay. I think this is probably, I'm guessing this is probably from the 60s, 70s at the latest, and so this would be an unintentional.
I was going to say early 60s. And I would say at that point, it's unintentional, mainly because these things back then were written so fast. I mean, they're just cranking this material out. That they didn't have time to sit there and think, oh, I'm going to, I'm going to be subversive in this panel. I just don't buy it.
Yeah. Well, that's absolutely. Now, this is where I should then do the surprise reveal that this is actually from Cherry Comics in the 80s. But anyway, sorry. How about here's kind of 2-on-1, and these are no pun intended. We've had a lot of awkward scenes with Batman through the years, right?
Sure.
I mean, the gentle caress of Bruce there. This feels like, I mean, well, again, what do you think? Unintentional or intentional here of just trying to create something awkward looking?
Well, I'll go from the writer's perspective. If that Batman panel was done Marvel style, which probably was not, then if it had to be dialogued after the fact, completely intentional. If it was in the script, no, not intentional.
Okay, I like that perspective. All right.
If you're saying,
I'm not sure.
If you're saying Batman comforts, Dick Grayson or whoever that is, maybe that's Jason Todd after he dyed his hair, and Robin's taking his shirt off, or you don't even say that, and the artist gives you this. How can you not lean into it?
For sure.
I would.
Did you ever have, so when you get pages and you're then scripting it, kind of in the Marvel method, did you ever get something and go, this isn't what I meant, but we're going with it?
Not really. Not because I didn't work the Marvel method too often. I did it early in my career, and then I kind of moved off it fairly quickly. So no, I can't think of an instance where I got back. I mean, well, okay, I take that back. Not in a sexual nature or some sort of lewd thing, but I had art come back on something that I did at Wildstorm, where an artist for some reason decided to just draw a row of heads that was not attached to any bodies. And sure. I think I went in and changed the script, and one of the characters saying, "Where do our bodies go? Why are our heads just floating here?" Because I was so over it at that point. So I've certainly done things like that, just out of spite or out of pique. So yeah, I've done it.
That's awesome. It's what I can't get over is, and I think that is Jason Todd. It's the artist drew him looking so uncomfortable here. Like
Sure.
no part of this looks like comforting. I mean, I don't know. It's always tough because you read into these things for sure.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, that's just awkward all around.
Speaking of awkward, here I'm pretty confident. I've heard some of the backstory here. And the idea is that Tom is going to wrestle and attack the bear. But the way the artist drew this, I mean, what's going on there?
Well, it's clearly a man making out with a forest creature.
Yes, it is. I mean, this is always where I kind of wonder, the artist is taking time putting all this together. At some point, drawing this all out, the artist had to think, I have gone very astray.
Yeah. I mean, it goes back to, this looks like an old comic to me as well. I mean, this goes back to when you crank something out, this is one of 1,000 drawings that this guy did, in probably record time. So what I like about it is that the bear is being very rough with the man and tearing his shirt apart,
Yeah. Yeah. Tom looks on the other hand, like he's taking a more gentle approach.
Well, we don't see where his hands are. That's the disturbing part.
That's true. Yeah. This one could be much, much worse. There's a lot of things going on here. I would have loved to, I want more of the story behind this for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. That's amazing.
Yeah. I think I've seen shirts and things with this panel printed out at cons, but this is one of the more infamous ones that I've seen out there.
Right.
This is way too much text to read. I tried to show Crazy Letter. I like to throw this out because one of the other things that gets said, and I saw a editorial or some comment on it wasn't CBR, maybe it was Comics Beat, talking about how critical fans who are angry about things really only happened in the last, say, 10 years. And before that time, fans were apparently always pleasant and cheerful.
Huh.
And what? Yeah, I'm going to interview Ron Mars in a little bit, and I definitely want to talk to him about the very peaceful reaction he got when Hal Jordan went bad, but I'm sure was pleasant and delightful. But here's letter writers. What cracks me up is this is letter writers to Batman commenting on Batman Year One and how absolutely shitty it is. I think the line here is, you should be ashamed of yourselves for releasing such trash, bagging on the art. What cracks me up is not only is DC printing these letters, they're printing it with the full address of the person who wrote it there. And I mean, this is weird, right? First of all, isn't it strange that they used to print hate mail and just print the entire address to these people?
Well, let's assume that nobody thought that anyone was going to hunt anybody down over a negative letter.
True. It was an innocent time. Yeah.
Exactly. But I mean, clearly these letter hacks have horrible taste. Horrible taste.
I mean, the script is barely the only good point, and even that is mediocre. Ha! Wow, this is this is Batman Year One. I can't. Crazy is as in dumb and stupid. The art is horrible.
I had a few letters printed in DC Comics back in the day around this time, and one of them was it wasn't an overly negative letter. I think I disagreed with a characterization that was inconsistent with something that had happened a couple years earlier. And I mostly did it because I was sort of on a letter writing craze at that time, because I sort of cracked the code of how to get letters printed. So I was just looking for things to write about, that weren't completely innocuous. And I thought, well, maybe I felt that way, but if maybe expressing a dissenting opinion will get me on the letters page. And in that case, it worked. So I never went this far as these guys did, but I can see some teenager thinking, "Oh, I'm gonna be, I'm gonna have a negative opinion because it's gonna make me look cool or whatever. It's gonna, or then they won't dare print this, will they?" And there they are printing it. I don't know. There's all kinds of reasons that don't necessarily have to do with what the actual opinion is. And I'm sure these guys are as embarrassed as I am now with the letter printed.
I have to wonder if anyone ever wrote these people mail, or I mean, was there any follow up? Did anybody go find Andy and write him saying, you suck, you suck? I wonder what ever came of this entire chain. A couple other questions have come up. If you were to return to the X titles in the current Krakoan era, and I'm not sure if you're caught up on all that, would you prefer to write about breakfast, lunch, or dinner?
I really don't agree with the premise of that question, so I have no answer for you.
There you go. Fair enough. What are some genres you wish took off more in comics?
That's an interesting question. I don't think genres, to me, they don't work that way. Any story can dip into any genre you want it to. In terms of genres that I wish took off, they've all kind of had their day, as far as I know. I can't think of a genre that hasn't had significant impact, whether it's romance comics, they had their day, war comics had their day. Certainly superhero comics had their day. I don't know what genre we're in that's dominating right now. I guess you could still say superhero comics, but that is domination by default. But, there's been, I can't think of a genre that hasn't had an opportunity to make some impact. And maybe I'm just not casting a wide enough net in my brain.
Yeah, it tends to be cyclical. And I think we are at the start of seeing some new things emerge. I think horror is certainly coming back in a bigger way right now, and a couple other things.
Yeah. But I mean, is horror comics going to be bigger than they were in the 50s with EC Comics? I don't know.
Oh, I doubt it.
Yeah.
I'd have a hard time believing it would.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's what I say. It's hard to think of something that hasn't had a moment, a cultural moment that was impactful,
How about this? Can you just, what was the genesis for Butch Baker?
You mean Butcher Baker?
Butcher Baker.
Mike Huddleston and I wanted to work together. It was our chance to do a subversive superhero title. We were big fans of Elektra Assassin, and we wanted to do something in that vein, which is why it was 8 issues. And Huddleston hadn't really had a chance to show how good he was up till that point. He'd done a few things that sort of hinted how great he was at different types of comic book art and different approaches. So we wanted to do a book where he had free reign to include everything that he knew how to do. And I'm always up for a good subversive superhero comic. So that's pretty much how that one came around.
Very nice. How about ever thought about revisiting Milkman Murders?
I've never thought about it because I feel like the story kind of is pretty self-contained, although it was open to somewhat of a sequel. But no, it's never. I don't know if I ever even had an idea for where it would go from there. But I love that Steve Parkhouse art, though. I loved working with him. He's a big.
You've worked with some incredible artists over the time. You just incredible creative talents. You a wide range too of just a lot of different styles that you've had over your career.
Well, I figure if people don't like my writing, at least they can't fault me for my taste. I think I have pretty good taste in collaborators.
Perfect. You hide it with the art. That's perfect.
Yeah.
But how about one last question? When Rex cured the world, did Bobo lose his intelligence?
That's an interesting question. the answer is Bobo wasn't all that intelligent. I mean, yes, he was a talking monkey, but those are a dime a dozen. I mean, he was kind of a run of the mill talking monkey. I wouldn't say he was, in my opinion, he wasn't overly intelligent. But then I also know who the inspiration for Bobo Haha was. So that my opinion may be biased.
There you go. Okay. How about, and I know I've missed some questions here. The chat's kind of spiking on me. It flips, but how about the favorite comic when you were growing up? What was a comic that locked you in? Somebody else has something similar. Like, was there a comic that you remember first reading, you thought, I've got to get in this space. I've got to write comics. Was there one comic that kind of fit those bills?
Like a series? Like, what was my favorite thing?
Anything. Just you read it and you're like, this is clearly for me. I don't just show this is what I want to spend my time doing.
Avengers.
Very nice. And what run was that, or what era was that of Avengers?
This was the between 150 and 200. This was the George Perez and John Byrne, Jim Shooter, David McElhinney. Nice.
Well, that was that entire time period for almost everything Marvel was doing was great.
Yeah, I mean, I could sit here and wax my opinions on the Korvac saga. I think it's both overrated and underrated, but I still love those comics. I'm a big. It's funny, even though George Perez is like the big Avengers artist of my generation, twice really. I'm really, if you were to put a gun to my head, my favorite run was that Michelinie John Byrne run. They've only lasted about a year and a half, really, but they really hit me when I was a kid, even more so than I was more of an Avengers fan than an X-Men fan. So my John Byrne love came from Avengers and not from the X-Men.
Very nice. That was there were some great comics in there. And speaking of great comics, so in the past, and I mentioned before we went on the air, this week, I don't know what it was. Maybe it's the first week of October or whatever. This is like the money week of comics. This is going to be maybe the best collection, I think, of books that I've seen coming out. So are you ready for this? Do you like this bit? This is one of your favorite parts.
Bring it on. Bring it on.
Yeah. So obviously we already talked about X-Men #1 from the relaunch, but we also got the classic X-Men that came out with that Art Adams cover that's been on like a million posters and shirts. And this was the lead into the Mutant Massacre these are kind of three pretty major moments with X-Men this week.
Yeah, the Mutant Massacre thing was I was kind of over X-Men. What to the degree that I was ever into X-Men, I was kind of over it by then. However, classic X-Men #1 is so interesting to me, especially even now, because I may be remembering wrong, but didn't aside from the John Bolton backups, didn't for this first issue, maybe the first two issues of Classic X-Men that reprinted Giant Size #1, didn't Claremont and Cockrum go in and even add some material to that comic?
Yes, they absolutely did. So they filled in some pieces here. They made some adjustments. It was, and this was a good run. And this was Classic X-Men outsold a lot of the other books Marvel was putting out, which just speaks to the popularity of the X-Men at the time.
Yeah.
But yeah, some really cool backups.
Cover either.
No, that cover was one of the. Adams putting his stamp on things. Yeah. And then we also had the long shot that came out, this annual that I think was another. This was when they're in Asgard, and this was another Art Adams doing the X-Men.
Yeah.
And then more recently, this is a Mark Millar, Greg Capullo Reborn that's about to become a Netflix show.
Oh, good.
Are you seeing any of those or?
Yes. I check in on this. It's funny. I used to think anything that was derived from a comic book in other media that I would never miss. I would be there for all of it. And there's just too much of it. I can't keep up with everything that's out there. And in terms of Miller stuff, I watched, I think, the first episode and a half of Jupiter's Legacy. and
Mm-hmm.
I guess I would have kept watching it, but for whatever reason, I got derailed from watching. I could never jump back on. I just never jumped back on.
Well, right now you have Titans running, you have Doom Patrol running. I know I'm forgetting two others. There are at least two ongoing superhero series constantly.
Yeah.
Disney's got their whole world. It's just a absolutely insane amount of stuff you have to get through. Jamie joined us a little bit late. Thank you for joining, Jamie. Always a big supporter of what we do here. He says, I want to thank you, first of all, for your work on Hip Flask, A Natural Selection, Concrete Jungle. What was it like writing that character and spending time in that universe?
Well, I mean, it was a chance to work with Ladrone again, which I would never turn down, but that was Richard Starking's character. He went on to do Elephant Man for Image for many, many years. And so I was kind of executing his vision as best I could. I mean, it was his world. It was his character. It was his vision. And I was there to help. I was there to be, it was a marketing thing more than anything for me to be able to say, from the guys who did Cable, here's this Hip Flask comic. Yep. As it turned out, it was so well drawn by Ladrone. I mean, it was fully painted that he didn't even need me there. I mean, it was the art sold it on its own. But at the time I was more than happy to help out and basically help get that IP out there so that Richard could eventually do the Elephant Man series.
And that was a great series. And speaking of books that came out this week, here are all books that came out this week. You're probably familiar with all three of these.
Oh boy. Yes, I am.
You actually have a lot of books that came out this week, as it turned out.
Really?
Yeah, I don't know why. Again, it just seemed to land this Uncanny X-Men Poptopia. I've seen more and more people talk about how much they like this particular arc within that run.
Really? My God. At the time it came out, there was plenty of people who I would not necessarily hated it, but were scratching their heads thinking, what the hell are they doing? And, in hindsight, I don't blame them. There's some interesting ideas. I don't know. It wasn't the best execution of a story that I've ever done.
This stuff gets remembered. Absolutely. And Chuck Gibson, who's still in the chat. I am serious. We do need to, I would love to interview you and talk to you. You're awesome. But Zodiac, which we talked about, I think, on one of the interviews. There's of course Godland.
I love that.
That's
Zodiac,
not it. So.
Nathan Fox art was amazing, and that was obviously part of that Dark Reign nonsense. But we got away with a hell of a lot for being part of a company-wide crossover thing.
Yeah, that story was complete. You didn't need to pay attention to anything else in the crossover to have a good story there.
Well, that's the idea, Perch. That's how
that worked. That's
how we do things,
Well, that's not an idea others often fulfill. So well done. But so how did you come up with the Zodiacs? Ask this guy.
Well, the visual was obvious, from the actual Zodiac killer, but the idea was that that Dark Reign was Norman Osborn is in charge of the Marvel Universe, and I just thought, well, if the villains are in charge, then who are the villains? And so it was more about somebody who would look at that setup and go, I like being a villain. I don't want to be seen as a good guy. I think Norman Osborn's full of shit, and I'm ready to, say so publicly and try to not. It was about a villain who was so villainous that he was offended that Norman Osborn took the route of, as far as the world was concerned, going legit.
Yeah.
Which I kind of liked. I like the notion of I like being a villain. I don't want to be a good guy. I don't want to, be the president or whatever. I want to be the bad guy that I am.
It was it was a great series, and I'm surprised Marvel hasn't reprinted some of those, because and even that story itself would be one that would work pretty well as a Disney Plus series or something like that. So who knows? Maybe a check's coming your way at some point.
I see Eric Breen in the chat talking about the Korvac saga. If he wants to go mano a mano with me, I'll take either side, that it was overrated or underrated, and argue the shit out of that.
Breen's great. That I would love to. We'll have to set that up. We should do some of these bigger. We could record them, but do some of these retrospectives and get the point counterpoint on that stuff. Would you be open for that, right?
Hell yes.
Okay, Breen. All right, Breen. Breen Casey talking about Korvac saga. Let's set that up.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I said, what's funny about this week is, and I stopped at 2, but I could go on with probably another 3 pages of books of yours that came out this week.
Is that Wildcats version 3.0 cover? Or is that an X Corp cover? I can't. Oh wait,
nope, that's Wildcats. I see what you did there. Yes, that's version 3.0. Yes.
Yeah. No, see, that was me being snarky. It's getting late.
I like it.
In the live stream. I'm ready to throw down.
There's a lot of repetition that's going on right now. How about this?
That Superman issue is beautiful. Micro Wingo art. It's fantastic.
Yes, that was when you were working with Ringo, which we talked about on one of the interviews as well. I mean, you got a chance to work with him, and you were doing all those Superman issues as done in ones, as I recall.
Yes. Well, except for that Our World's at War. That was when I was talking about it feeling like a weekly series. That was one of the examples right there.
Yeah. Oh my God. Your collaboration with Ringo is amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. But now Electra Assassin Perch are killing me. This is probably one of my favorite series of the 80s.
Yeah, this was a great, and again, another one that is hard to find. Marvel doesn't put this out. They make it difficult to get your hands on this.
Yeah,
for no reason.
Talk about underrated, and I think, it's so goddamn good, and it's one of those things that should have been, influenced me, but it was not as influential on other creators as I thought it would be. I thought there'd be all kinds of work that referenced this and touched on this, but I guess it was so impressive as a piece of work that I think it scared a lot of people away.
It was, it was a turn for Marvel. This was Marvel was putting out some decent stuff. This would be in the mid 80s. When I guess the date's on there. 86.
Yeah.
Yeah. And this was, so what, hang on, if I'm doing the math right, that's 35 years ago, basically today. That's kind of crazy. That actually makes me feel terrible. I shouldn't have done that. But yeah, this was a great series. I'm curious, people, I think all these covers to this series, this 8-issue series, were pretty incredible. Just amazing art, great story, but forgotten. Like you said, I think a lot of this is just completely memory hold for people.
I'm assuming if you've got this right, that Elektra and Man of Steel, did they come out in the same week, the same year? This is talking the same day. I think Starbrand was 85, right? But these two were 86.
Yeah, Starbrand was 85. It's the same week, but it may not be the same. The same week, maybe not the same year. But yeah, I think that Man of Steel was also 86, wasn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah.
Wow.
I'm telling you, this week had just crazy big titles hitting at the same time, and just an amazing time. That Man of Steel, of course, John Byrne, and this is one where they sell this, unlike Elektra, they sell this collection on Amazon. And it's still often in DC's top 10 of just being just a reprinted comic. Did you like the New Universe by any chance?
I was not on board for the New Universe. I was still liking the old universe.
Yeah, it seemed like a misfire. Hickman obviously came in and tried to use the characters again and bring it back with some kind of new life and new spin, but I don't know. It didn't work for me either. There's a lot of nostalgia about the New Universe, but none of those titles ever really landed for me.
If you ever listen to Jim Shooter talk about the behind the scenes New Universe stuff, you know that line had no chance whatsoever.
Yeah. And they, it kind of, after Shooter left, it became they wound up blowing up Pittsburgh, and they did things to kind of screw with Shooter as well. It seems like a lot of conflict around this.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't know if it had gone to plan. Shooter's original plan involved a lot more money to pay artists and really get top flight talent and more marketing behind it. I honestly don't know if even with all that, it would have landed any better than it did. But we'll never know, I guess.
Yeah, I'm not going to be able to pronounce this well, especially having been drinking. But Ilthador, I think this is probably the answer to that question. This week usually is the first week of the fourth quarter of the year. That would make some sense as to why it would be so packed to some extent. This may have been a time when companies were actually trying to play to that. So that wouldn't be a terrible thought. So maybe that's your reason. But it was astounding how many great comics came out this week.
Yeah, I didn't read any of these that are up right now. Oh no, I read Spawn. I read Spawn.
This was early on. Just issue 5 in Todd's run. I think this is when Chuck Gibson was on Nightwing, and this was the rebooted new #1 Ghost Rider with Marvel Knights.
Oh yeah, I didn't read that. I did. Yeah, I was on board for Spawn. Just kind of wondering what the hell it was, but yeah, that Ghost Rider.
Spider-Man wearing a cape.
Who's that artist on Ghost Rider? That's Trent somebody, right? The guy who did
Trent. Yeah, Kanuga or Ken.
Yeah,
Ken,
he was an indie guy. But what was that indie book that he did that everybody knows?
Hell, this is where Joe would come in handy because he's the guy who can make these connections. I don't know. I know he had a book that kind of brought him to the table here. At this point, we're just stalling for somebody in the chat to tell us. But
yeah, somebody's got to know because that's what he was known for before.
Creed.
Oh, there you go. Okay.
Yeah, I think it was Creed. All right, people came through for us. Thank you very much. I'm drinking whiskey like I normally drink.
Yeah.
All right. So here is this is a run of Amazing Spider-Man when we that I don't know. I'm saying I say this was a good time in Amazing Spider-Man.
Oh my God.
We had Spider-Man saving Top Dog. How about that? And I love survivors here. I like the little tagline they hear: no silly villains, no unnecessary fight scenes, no misleading covers. I'm pretty sure though that this cover was misleading.
I don't know Survivors. What does that say? Prelude Graphics? I don't even know that company.
Prelude Graphics, who kind of came out hot of saying, we're actually going to treat comic fans like they deserve, and we're giving you, actual story and art full. I mean, they came out swinging, and well, it didn't last, obviously.
Props to you, Perch. You stumped me on that one. I have no recollection or awareness of that comic or that publisher. That's crazy. What year is that?
Very few. This would be 86, I think. It was late. No, yeah, 86 or 87. 86. I can barely read the number there on the top.
Was that I know we can't. Was that a black and white book or was that full color?
No, I believe it was. No, I think it was black and white. Now I'm going to have to go look up the book but it wasn't good. And it all the books and the material they were putting out was incredibly boastful about how crappy everybody else was. And then, they basically set themselves up for a huge fall.
So they did not survive. They were not survivors is what you're saying.
They were absolutely not survivors. Yes. They went right into into nowhere. But this Spider-Man run, I'm still kind of struggling with this because I remember this being the Sinister Syndicate and a pretty solid run of Spider-Man during this time. But did you read much of Spider-Man? Spider-Man was never one of my favorite characters, but what did you ever get into this part?
I think the only time I ever read Spider-Man regularly was when Todd came on the book. Because I was following what Todd was doing. But I mean, I dipped in and out like Craven's Last Hunt. I was there for some of the Claremont Byrne team ups. I was there for, but in terms of I bought Spider-Man when I was a little kid because that was the character you knew. That was the most visible Marvel character at the time. But I never really got hooked into the stories or the soap opera of that character. I don't know why. Like I said, I was more of an Avengers kid because if you think about it, all superhero comics are team books. In Spider-Man's case,
Right.
the team consists of Spider-Man, Aunt May, Mary Jane, J. Jonah Jameson, Robbie Robertson, all his supporting cast. But in the Avengers, the cast were all superheroes, and that appealed to me a lot more.
Yeah. No, this run, I'm the same. I mean, the team of, when Aunt May's on your team, that's not a fascinating team to me, but it just, I mean, I don't know. I like this. This run had some energy to it. It was fun, but I'm with you. I never was able to quite get Spider-Man. I would dip in and out for the same kind of runs. Craven's Last Hunt, obviously incredible, but it was, how about, though, over here we got Mike Zech on Captain America. And I still maintain Zech was one of the best artists for Captain America that's ever kind of drawn that character.
I was so there for Mike Zech on Captain America. I mean, J.M. DeMatteis was, that was kind of probably the first comics that I read of his on a regular basis. And what I remember about that run is that it kind of was building to something, and then it kind of petered out. It actually peaked before it was meant to peak. I think it peaked with that Deathlock 3-parter. And it never really reached that height again for some reason, because they were building to some sort of Red Skull story. And I remember just being like very underwhelmed by where it was going. And then they kind of, I don't know if both of them jumped off, but that Red Skull story never really went anywhere. To my recollection,
I mean, I think
to do with part of it was one of those issues landed on Assistant Editors Month, which always fucked up something when you're trying to really build drama.
That's true. That the Assistant Editors Month derailed quite a bit, actually. I mean, people remember it fondly, but that did fuck up a lot of runs.
I mean, I remember it landed at the end of a big Galactus storyline that John Byrne was doing in Fantastic Four, the trial of Reed Richards. And he'd been kidnapped, and they were going to rescue him. And then in the final issue, you open up the first page, and it's John Byrne at his drawing board, talking to his editor. It's like, really? Okay.
Yeah. I've never been a fan of that type of storytelling. People are on us about this Red Skull story, by the way. I agree. I didn't think it culminated in a wicked ending, but people are saying we're crazy for.
Man, they might be right. I just know for some reason, I checked out. And I don't know if it was maybe Mike Zech left early. I don't remember what it was. I just remember it just didn't land for me for some reason. It just, again, I contend that it peaked with the Deathlock 3-parter, and never hit that height again. I stand by that statement.
Yeah, absolutely. How could a comic could this cover a Black Hawk ship today?
Hell no. No company would let a swap go out like that. That Mark Evanier Dan Spiegel run is also underrated.
It definitely is.
It's good comics. Mark Evanier was editing and writing the book, so it was kind of out from under a lot of corporate. Not that there was a lot of corporate interference back then, anyway, but it was a singular work for hire comic. And at the end of that Black Hawk run, there's some great Howard Chaykin covers, which were kind of the precursor to him doing. The Black Hawk series, also underrated. I love that Chaykin Black Hawk series.
I like the imagery of basically they've got the swastika so large it's actually going to squash them. For some reason it's the shadow that gets me, that this thing is falling on them. It's a crazy cover, but you're right. There's zero chance this would get printed. I mean, think about it this way: this comic and this cover was in grocery stores and gas stations all across America at one point. People are getting their bread and apples and things, and this is sitting there.
Love it. And I love the fact that they double down on the swastika. It's not just the swastika, but it's the shadow of the swastika.
I'm picturing the mom who's finishing up the grocery shopping, and she kind of strolls by to get the kid, and the kid's sitting there reading this, and she's like, that had to be a strange moment for some people. I don't know.
Not to go on a tangent rant here, but seeing these comics like this and seeing I'm not nuts about that Captain America logo, but the logos, talk about a lost art.
Oh, for sure.
Comic book logos, I don't know what's happened, but they don't make them like they used to.
I agree. No, I mean I agree, and I think there's a guy who's designing the current trade dress for DC, and he's putting some art into it again, and it's kind of nice to see. But it just like we went a good 10 years where this all fell apart. So I mean, it just became very generic, and I blame kind of his move to digital and people discovering that they can just type something in Photoshop and then scale it and put a drop shadow there and they're done. I think that's kind of the problem. It stopped being a design task and started just being basic typography.
Yeah, it's a bummer. I mean, when we did when Sex was a monthly comic, we had a different logo every issue. The designer Sonia Harris did a great job of like making each one distinct. Wildcat 3.0 with Ryan Hughes, that was also sort of an attempt to kind of bring some artistry back. It is a lost art. But you're right. Some of the DC stuff is making an effort again, which is nice to see.
It's starting to, and this is, I don't want to, I mean, not to punk anybody, but these three logos actually kind of are that point. The Punisher is the most designed one here, but Justice League is literally somebody took, I think, Helvetica Bold there and then skewed it.
Well, they're trying to do it. I don't know if Chip Kid actually did that logo, but if not, it's somebody trying to do a Chip Kid.
Yeah, and the Last Christmas, somebody basically put a border on some text with a gradient behind it. I mean,
well, at least though with the Last Christmas, it's you don't expect an iconic artistic logo because it's not necessarily advertising a character or an IP. This is more like a normal book title, which I give it a pass for that reason.
Okay, that's fair. Well, and yeah, you always, but it all of these logos, and it's not like they're awful, but none of them have that artistry of the previous page.
No, not even close. Not even close. I mean, the Punisher's a variation on the original Punisher logo, so I give it points for at least staying in the family, but it's not better than the original Punisher logo. It's not an improvement.
No, it's I love just really good cover design, and I think that's been a lost art for a while. I mean, this is going back again, but there's more heart to Indiana Jones there and Micronauts, even though they are clearly very dated.
Yeah. Well, Micronauts is a comic book. I mean, that's
sure.
And it looks like a Cockrum cover to me. I don't know if I'm getting that right, but
I'm relatively sure that's a Cockrum. Well, I can't quite tell on there, but it's somebody doing Cockrum, if not Cockrum.
Well, the Nightcrawler thing, you feel like Cockrum elbowed whoever had that cover gig. Said, I'm doing the Nightcrawler cover.
Yeah.
And that
I like how he's staring in the window like a creeper there.
Well, yeah. I remember that Indiana Jones comic so well. It's crazy.
Yeah, which number one.
It was such an improvement. I mean, I was so disappointed at the time by the movie adaptation, which was drawn by John Buscema of all people, but it just didn't land for me. That to have then John Byrne come on he only did 2 issues, but god damn, they were good looking comics.
No, they took the movie adaptation seriously, and this is Terry Austin on this cover here.
Oh, wow.
There was some great stuff in there.
Yeah, the story I heard was that John Byrne got so dicked around by the approvals people at Lucasfilm, like they took so long to get back to him, and the demands that they had to change things were ridiculous. They knew nothing about the production of comic books. But he was like, screw this, I'm all out of here. So he did 2 issues and was gone. Yeah.
Can you imagine a world where the opposite happened and the production studio is like, oh my God, we got a legit artist on this. Let's work with this and actually create some stories. And maybe this could be something that we're going to use for sequels or shows down the road. And Byrne would have actually just stayed on the book for 20, 30 issues. Like, what would that world look like?
I can imagine it, but I'd be imagining a fantasy land that would never happen.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. I like. Did you ever get much into Marvel Fanfare?
It would depend on who was doing it. I mean, it started
Yeah.
strong. I mean, well, I should say it started strange. That X-Men story
Yeah.
that kicked it off was like it's Michael Golden. No, it's Dave Cockrum. No, it's Paul Smith. You know, it was very haphazard. And then from that point, it was who's on it, who's doing this issue. And there were winners and there were ones I didn't buy.
Yeah. I mean, Frank Miller did an incredible issue in there. I think we reviewed it, but you're right. It was kind of all over the place, and it hurt because people did exactly what you said. They'd come in and they'd buy kind of the issues they wanted. It was very hard to get any kind of consistency rolling of that comic.
I never, the thing is, I never, for whatever reason, comics that were in a, obviously a better format with better paper and printing was better, never really made any difference to me personally. I never was overly excited by, it's on Baxter paper or whatever. I mean, oftentimes it just meant more money to spend, but I was perfectly fine with newsprint comics. I would accept occasional crappy printing. It was just all part of the package to me.
It always felt weird when Marvel would try and educate the buyers at what Baxter paper was. Like I'm convinced the vast majority of people reading the comics did not give a single shit about Baxter paper, and it always felt like they were trying to push this idea on people who really didn't care. And I mean, quality of paper is fine, but I just remember this time period where Marvel's like, now it's on Baxter paper, and nobody understood what that was or cared.
Well, I'm going to date myself again. I remember that when the New Teen Titans and Legion of Superheroes went to those Baxter series, it was such hoopla. Of course, Giffen was gone in 3 issues. George Perez lasted about 5 or 6 issues, maybe. And so they were kind of the deaths of those franchises, as far as I was concerned. They made such a big deal about making that transition, but at that, it drove those artists off their titles that had been doing for years up until that point. So, there was a catch-22 with that whole thing for me.
Yeah. Oh no, and so he's mentioned, the Baxter paper books definitely hold up now. So as a collector, absolutely. But at the time, it was, I mean, I liked it. It just was very, very strange. And I think here's another comment. Yeah, some of the creators didn't like the medium. It changed the way things looked. Absolutely. But
this is a really weird thing to say, but newsprint comics have a certain smell that Baxter comics didn't have. I have a nostalgia for newsprint, how it smelled,
Well, I think I remember my first experience with Baxter paper thinking this comic was cheaper somehow, and it was better paper, but it didn't have the smell. It didn't feel right. It felt like a facsimile of what a real comic was going to look like.
Right.
I don't know.
Right.
Didn't seem right. Speaking of like awkward things on covers to, put in the grocery store, this was back when Conan, I should say, have a mostly naked woman hang off his leg.
Well, that's just classic Conan, right? That's classic Frazetta inspired, kind of, I don't know what you'd call it, but what's the male version of cheesecake,
Yeah. I mean, she's sitting on a bunch of dead bodies that cannot be comfortable with where her ass is.
No, but
she's
that's
sitting on a corpse.
I mean, she's, you just got to do what you got to do, especially when you're posing like that on a pile of dead bodies.
Yeah. I mean, you got to wrap yourself around that leg. Doesn't matter what you're sitting on. There's. I also like we've got a Vision and Scarlet Witch comic where they're saying we don't want your kind around here, which is it's a ballsy move for a comic.
Talk about, I'm a big Englehart fan from back in the day, but that series was kind of a slog.
It really was. Yeah.
12 issues was maybe a bit much. And it also the first couple of issues crossed over with the West Coast Avengers, which had launched simultaneously. And it was, holy cow. It was a slog. I got to admit it.
It didn't feel like they had 12 issues of story to go in that series. Like that. Not even remotely close. Yeah, that was that wasn't one of. I mean, it was when WandaVision came out. I remember that a bunch of people did a run on these comics, and I have to imagine the people who picked up this series wanting it to connect to that show were extremely confused.
Well, I'll say this about that series in particular. It was Englehart, and I think, was it Richard Howell was the artist on that? It's got a quality to it now that's very comfort food vibe, you know.
Yeah.
Although I wouldn't want to read it again. But my memories of it have softened with age.
I like that. It's much better now. I definitely do not want to read it again, but
yeah,
it's probably better. Yeah, that's fair. First issue of Miss Marvel.
Yeah, I feel like that series started out weak but got stronger as it went on. When Claremont came on, and then when Cockrum joined him, those are pretty cool comics. I'm kind of down for those.
It did take a while. The first couple issues read extremely awkward. They're trying to do a lot. She's an assistant to J. Jonah Jameson, so it's weirdly kind of connected into Spider-Man somehow, but not really. This was a very strange book, if you go back and read it. And it also, as I recall, this was Jerry Conway doing this, and I think on the second issue, or maybe it was the first issue, he writes this editorial in the book kind of defending why he's writing a book and not a woman, because they were kind of pushing a feminist angle a little bit in the book. And he does it by saying something along the lines of like, well, why not a man? Well, bluntly, there aren't a lot of talented women. And it is the most weird package ever if you pick it up and look at it.
I have seen that editorial, and it is completely tone deaf. Completely tone deaf. It was tone deaf then. It's worse now. It's amazing. Amazing.
Yeah. Clearly, I don't think he meant it the way it sounded in that editorial, but it just, to look at this book, which is promoting itself when it came out as finally comics for feminists. I mean, that was their selling point. And there's a bunch of things about kind of empowered women in the book and from her writing, and she puts J.J. Jonah in his place. And then you get that letter at the end, and you're like, what in the hell? Who put this package together? It's strange.
Yeah. But I'm all in on that Invaders issue. Frank Robbins, Jack Kirby cover. Give it to me. Love it.
Yeah. That's great. And there's Paul Kupperberg over there on Vigilante, which was another underrated series.
I was curious. I can't tell what issue number that is on the Vigilante book. Is that the
number 25?
25. Oh, maybe it's not Todd Smith.
Yeah, that is Todd Smith. Yes.
Oh, good. Okay.
Kupperberg and Smith. Yeah.
There's an issue, by the way, of Vigilante. It's like a one-off. I think it's around issue. It's in the early teens, maybe, or maybe it's either 7 or 14. I don't know. I'm blanking. But it's a Trevor Von Eden drawn issue that is prime Trevor Von Eden, like total. If you like thriller, this is thriller Trevor Von Eden. And I didn't even know it existed because I wasn't big on the Vigilante. I bought the first few issues, but I wasn't a big Keith Pollard fan. So I was like, I could do without this. So I missed that issue, and I just got it, within the last 10 years, which is saying something for a comic from 1983.
Yeah.
Man, if you love Trevor Von Eden, that's one to track down.
I like this set for a bunch of reasons. So first of all, you got this Crisis issue, of course, that highly remembered. I like, though, you've got two interesting things going on. You got Superman, who appears to just be murdering the shit out of the Omega Men, which is always super fun when Superman snaps and goes crazy. But you've also got Godzilla, who appears to have shrunk down and is battling rats in the sewer.
There you go. Now, okay, so I know Godzilla has got to be Doug Minch and Herb Trimpe, but who drew that DC Presents cover?
So I was looking at that when I was putting this together, because I'm relatively certain this is an artist we know. And again, this is somebody, I'm sure somebody in the chat will immediately be able to call it up, but it's a nice, this is a nice cover and a nice issue.
Well, who did the issue? Because I don't think I have that issue.
I'm just going to have to look it up here while we See if I can beat somebody.
I'm getting serious Giffen vibes off that cover, but I know he didn't ink it.
That's what I thought too, but it doesn't look quite right for Giffen either.
Yeah.
I mean, it seems close to it, but let's see if I can get to the bottom of this here.
And the one thing I'll say about that Crisis cover is that you give George Perez almost any character, any superhero character, and he can nail a nearly definitive version of that character. The Spectre is not one of them.
That's true. Alex Zech was the penciler on this. And the cover, he was a cover artist as well. Yep.
Okay. Well, that makes sense.
Yeah. Nobody in the chat's helping me out tonight. Well, everybody's tired because we've got a comic convention and we have people everywhere. And how about, as we're kind of winding to the end of this, but what's the worst and most, what's the worst? I love the negativity. What's the worst and most insignificant hero in Marvel and DC? And could you make them great?
Well, I mean,
that's a tough one.
Because I don't subscribe to there being bad characters. There's only bad approaches and bad writing on those characters. So that's it's any character you could throw. I mean, me personally, you could throw me any character that is in the Marvel or DC universe, and I probably could come up with some kind of take on them that would be at least entertaining, if not, it might even be inappropriate, but at least it would be entertaining. Because at this point, I look at it as you're not just writing a character, you're writing a character in that particular universe. And that means you've got endless possibilities on how that character could connect to that universe. So, in viewed through that lens, there are no bad characters.
Yeah, that's true. I go with that. So you're saying basically, if it was, you're coming in to do a revival of the Clone Saga of Spider-Man, you could nail that.
Well, sure, because it's Spider-Man. Spider-Man's a great character.
Okay, fair enough. Well, no, it's technically not Spider-Man. It's one of the knockoff clones.
Well, but the concept is Spider-Man, and you can do a lot.
Yes. I'm sorry. I'm just trying to think of the lousiest. I mean, without being personal to some people, I think this kind of maybe refers back to that Krakoan book. Anyway, please fanboy Joe Casey for me. I'm impressed. Thankful he made the original Youngblood miniseries readable. Thanks for that. There you go.
Well, you're welcome.
Here's New Mutants Annual here, and I believe that's Bill Sienkiewicz on the cover, and he's there you go. Bill is basically giving us that Conan comic in reverse.
Yes, and it's not Bill on the inside. I know that for sure. But that cover is great.
He just did the cover.
Yeah. And again, Power Pack, not on board for that. I think it's probably I was too old for that when it came out, but well done series. I'm big fans of the creators.
Yeah, for sure. City of Bruce. How about that? Would you do it? Would you like to take a crack at City of Bruce?
Did I say there are no bad ideas before?
You did say there's no bad ideas. Yeah.
Well, I'm sure I could do something with it. I'm sure there's something to be salvaged from that.
We are gonna make that story happen. Absolutely. Here.
I can't wait. I'm there for it.
Somehow this book is happening. I don't know. There's a lot of good. I think this may be. Yeah, that's a lot of good memories for covers, right?
Oh yeah.
It's a good week, and
I would say
we've been talking about this.
Next time I come back for a live stream, it'll have to be, I would say, maybe in March or April, which was the prime release of like all those DC comics that I love. That's when
good
Justice League, Flash, Suicide Squad, Doom Patrol, all that stuff was launching in the spring. So that's that'd be a time for me to come back and just totally have a fangasm.
Let's absolutely do that. We got to, and we're gonna set up you and Breen talking Korvac.
I can't wait. Oh, I'll crush him. Like I said, I don't care what side I'm on. I will crush him.
That'll be a lot of fun. And people in previous shows have, I think, not believed that this was a thing, but just to prove it, yes, this was part of what was an extremely long storyline. You remember this, right? That where Supergirl's horse Comet was actually a human trapped as a horse, was in love with her, and she had a brief relationship with him.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. I gotta admit, my favorite part of this is that I guess, what is it? A planet named called Xerox. I love that.
Yes. Planet Xerox. And he briefly was on Planet Xerox where he lost his powers but became human. He made out with her. And then took because if you're a horse trying to pretend to be a human, you pick the name Bronco Bill because sure. And I like how as he's kissing her.
This just sounds to me like a more Weisinger classic, like totally his psyche spilling out onto his book. And, we're just seeing just how weird that guy really was.
It was funny because it went on for a while. And he does say there's always the inner dialogue chuckle. I wonder what Supergirl would say if she knew who I really was.
Yeah.
A horse. And then, as I recall, somebody just mentioned this in the chat. The horse would then later go on to try and romance Lois.
Right. Of course.
Yeah. Yeah. This horse was just super horny is what the horse was. But anyway, cool. Joe, thank you very much for spending New York City Comic Con weekend with me and doing comics. I love that we got a chance to chat with you.
It was great. And listen, somebody had to hang out while New York Comic Con was going. It might as well have been us.
Absolutely. We're doing it for you, the fans. But thank you, everybody who came and joined us tonight, asked questions. Did Lois say nay? Well done, Andrew. Yikes. Yeah. Gives new meaning to the word horseplay. Absolutely. I'm not going to read the other comments that are coming in because it's crazy. Certainly, if somebody wants to hit like for the video, thank you. Always appreciate it. It does something for the algorithm. I don't have any idea what, but Joe, thanks again. And we're going to set up this big battle with Breen.
Yeah. Bring it, Breen.
Perfect. Thank you, everybody, and talk to you soon.